Right, thank you. Okay. It's like reminds me of that Pigs in Space.
Yeah.
The Muppets. All right, so thank you all for inviting me to talk a little bit about W4UVA. So I've called this talk the W4UVA Reboot. My name's Scott Barker. My call sign is KQ4TNX. I thought I would just give a quick background of myself, just to give a little context for where I'm coming from. I did my undergrad at UVA a while ago. I went to grad school at the University of Michigan, and then I came back to UVA. I was fortunate enough to get a faculty position starting in 2001, and I've been here ever since. The classes that I typically teach are all in the area that we work in with ham radio. Although I didn't actually become a ham radio operator until a little over a year ago. So I've been teaching this stuff for decades. So electromagnetic fields is kind of the junior level fields class, lots of math. RF and wireless circuits, the way I do it, it's we actually build satellite receivers. So it's RF kind of VHF, exactly what we use. Microwave engineering is all about transmission lines, right? So we do, and when we do transmission lines, we're doing couplers, power combiners, filters, all the good stuff. My research is in what I call micro-machined RF technology. So at UVA, we've got a really nice clean room, which is typically what you use to make integrated circuits. I use a lot of those same techniques to make circuits for RF and microwave to terahertz frequencies. I don't do a lot with devices, transistors. We do some work with diodes, but a lot of what I do is actually making structures, right? And so, and in fact, in 2011, some of the work we'd done resulted in a product that we spun out as a company, Dominion Microprobes, and that is still going today here in Charlottesville. But that's a whole nother story. I don't want to jump into that today. We can talk about that another time if there's interest. So today I wanted to talk about is the W4UVA Amateur Radio Club, the club at the University of Virginia. There's really if you've not looked at it, there's the website for the club, w4uva.org, is really, has been well done. That was done probably in somewhere around 2012, 2013. I can't take any credit for that. There's a lot of really great information on there. And this history that I've kind of thrown up on here is from that website. So if you want to know more, there's a lot of great detail on there. There's a lot of names of folks that have been involved with the club back in the 70s. With testimony about what it was like and where they were, and just some really, really great stuff. So I kind of broke it up, and the website does as well, into kind of 4 main periods. Early on, and we don't have any direct evidence of this, but there is recollections of there being equipment of students that were there in the 70s that was from the 30s to 50s. And so there is some evidence, and there's history of the W4UVA club initially operating out of Peabody Hall over at UVA from the basement, which seems to be a trend through the history of the Amateur Radio Club at UVA. It at some point transitioned to Varsity Hall. Varsity Hall is actually somewhat of it's got its own history. It was, from my understanding, it was the first building to actually use a centralized airflow system because it was actually used, I think, during, well, I don't remember which war it was used for, but it was an infirmary. And so they were very concerned about airflow in the building and controlling, keeping disease down. Anyway, so at some point, W4UVA had been in the basement of Varsity Hall. And there was some evidence that W4UVA had been used as the call sign for that group. Although at some point in there, it also transitioned to W4SKI. And it seems that the W4UVA call sign was lost to the club. Somebody else had it. I don't have much history of that though. There's a period in between the 50s and 70s where there seems to be very little activity out of the club, and then in the 70s it picks up again. The website kind of says this period from the 70s to maybe the early 80s was kind of a little bit of the heyday of the club. It kind of picked back up at Thornton Hall, transitioned for a short period to Peabody Hall again, under the call sign WB4TZL. But then they managed to get their own space. They actually managed to get a ham shack. This building's no longer there. There was an old farmhouse over on Massey Road, and they had a space in there. And the recollections from the students at that time were just how great it was to have, it was a club. They were able to go and have their own space and have their equipment in there. They had antennas they could put up and interfere with the neighboring housing units and get into all sorts of trouble. There was a little bit, so Thornton Hall is where the main engineering school, my office is in Thornton Hall, it's still there. There were some stories there about them trying to erect antennas and getting in trouble with the dean because they were tearing down some of the branches of there's some really big magnolia trees in the courtyard there at Thornton Hall that are still there today. And apparently they had damaged some of those trees in their effort to string up some antennas. And so they were told in no uncertain terms to vacate, and so they did. Unfortunately, that farmhouse at some point, at least according to the website, it transitioned to a fraternity. So the university turned it over, kicked the clubs out that were in there, turned it over to a fraternity. And at some point after that, it was torn down, and I don't know exactly what location it was on Massey Hall, but it is no longer there. So then, so that happened around the mid 80s. So at that point, there is no physical ham shack. So the club kind of, it kind of lost that momentum, right? Without that core center, it just kind of petered a little bit. There's definitely evidence of solo operators that are at UVA that are, participating in the hobby, but no real core club at that point. Until about 2006. Now remember, I joined UVA as faculty in 2001, so I'm here at this point, although I am not at all connected with the club. Really, I had a few intersections with it along the way, but they did somewhere in here around 2006 or 2007. They were able to capture some other space at UVA. And this is the old nuclear reactor building that they now call the Observatory Mountain Engineering Research Facility, or OMERF in their lingo. So they captured some space up there. And then around 2012, and I remember this because Bert Harrell, who was president at one point of the club, he spent quite a bit of time working with facilities management, with emergency, Marge Sidebottom. I think a lot of you may know of Marge or have worked with her through emergency response and coordination. She worked with the club to get approval to put up this 72-foot crank up US tower that they have and is still there, right? So it's only now, I guess, about 13 years old. But it's quite a nice setup that they had there. So that was kind of a rejuvenation for the club. And that went up through about 2019. And you all know what happened after that, right? So after 2019, it kind of dissolved. Mike McPherson was helping with the group at the time. And I remember talking with Mike on different occasions for different things. And somewhere in that period, I had the good fortune to meet our current president, Bob Romanko. Bob and I actually met through scouting, through the scout troop that both of our sons participated in. And Bob kept yammering at me about, well, among other things, a large state northwest of here, but about ham radio. And many times, I tried to get Bob to join the troop committee, and he would never be able to show up to our troop committee meetings because he was always going to this ham radio club meeting. All right, fine. And finally, this was about, I guess, 18 months ago now. I finally said, okay, my kids they're off at college now. I had two kids that were, grown and out. It's time for me to go ahead and jump in and get involved with this amateur radio stuff. So I did that. I was teaching the electromagnetic fields class to a bunch of juniors, and I had kids that were interested. They wanted to know and learn about radio. And, I remember back in my day when I was growing up, the way I got into electrical engineering, my father bringing home, he worked at the University of Pennsylvania in a lab there, material science, but they had all this equipment, and he would just bring stuff home. And I would just be sitting there taking all this stuff apart and collected switches and dials and capacitors and transformers. And at one point he brought home this radio. It was an old transistor radio, like a real transistor radio. There were discrete transistors in it, and it wasn't working. And I don't know, I must have been 10, 11 years old, and I pulled this thing apart, and I'm looking at the circuit board, and I realize there's a solder joint that's broken. Aha! So I pull out my soldering iron, and I solder that joint, and damn it, the thing didn't work. Right? But the kids these days don't have any experience like that. They can't see it. You can't, I mean, even if you can open your phone, which is a feat in itself, there's nothing that you can do to any of the components in this phone. You can't fix anything. You can't even see what there is that needs to be fixed. So they had no real sense for how any of this stuff, for what it does, right? They can go online and see all kinds of information about it, but they don't have that hands-on, this is what it does. This is how it goes together. This is how I can make this work. And so what I have found is that there's just a real hunger among the students to really get their hands on building things. They really want to build things. They want to get in there and mess around with it and try stuff. And they've not been able to do that. So, I had this group of students that we got restarted August of 2024, so August a year ago. This is a photo from up in mechanical engineering in one of the classrooms up there, and they had a meeting up there. So the club president at the time was Jacob Cochran. He's since graduated. We had to kind of reconstitute the club and figure out what was up. Mike McPherson was helpful, but he was also kind of involved. He kind of went off and got involved with rocketry, right? So he's off on the other side of the engineering school now. So we had to, he let Bob and I know. Bob actually was early on helping us out, and he said, the W4UVA call sign, it's gonna expire, right? You got to renew it. You need to transfer the trusteeship, and you need to transfer this website, the W4UVA.org. So yeah, okay, we'll get there. And so we had the group started. We were working on it. Everything expired in January. We were too busy to mess with it. So finally, in like February of last year, we got that finally sorted out. And fortunately, it hadn't expired so long that we weren't able to still retain the call sign. So it turned out that the call sign was registered to, shoot, I'm going to forget his name now. Lee. I'll have to pull it out. So he was a former trustee of the club back, I think, in the 90s. But
Lee Moyer.
Lee Moyer, thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
He used his own FRN to register the W4UVA call sign. So it was linked to him. So it wasn't an independent club call sign. So I had to go track Lee down. And he was happy to help out, but he didn't realize the way it had been set up. I don't know how he inherited it that way. And Mike had no idea. He just kept renewing it over the years. But since I just got my license, I knew, well, you got to have an FRN. And when I read the information, it said, well, the club should have its own FRN, and the club's call sign should be associated with that. So, well, that's what we could do. So I did actually manage to get that switched over. The club now has its own FRN, and the call sign is associated with that. And I am listed as the trustee for the call sign. But Mike McPherson, KQ9P, was a great help, in that. And then Dudley White, Dudley's online. Dudley was also very, very helpful, with the students and trying to get them, to get their license. And so Dudley held, a technician class that he ran, I guess, I think this was through the last spring semester, all right? With a lot of these things, though, what we find is that the students are eager, right? They're interested. We had probably 35 students show up at an interest meeting. But the number of students that stuck it out through the technician class that Dudley held was maybe got down to 2, 3, or 4, right, at the end. And so trying to figure out how do you capture their interest, their imagination with the hobby. That's what is really my challenge and what I've been working on. And so that's going to lead up to a little bit here. So the other thing that happened last year is that, okay, we got the club reconstituted. And almost as soon as we had done that, we were notified that the ham shack in Homer, the nuclear reactor building, had to be vacated. So, you know, this is, I think, a recurring story with these clubs, right? Not surprising. I mean, so at this point, what the story is that building's being renovated. So it's an old building. The engineering school has money to renovate it, but to do the renovation, they need everybody to clear out. And we have been promised that we could have space back in that building, not the same space we have, which is unfortunate because when they put that tower in, they put a line underground right into the room where the shack was located. This was really great. So I don't know what the eventual resolution of that will be, but I know the guy, so I'm going to bug him. Anyway, so we had to vacate. So at that point, you know, we've got these students. There's a lot of interest to really do stuff with radio, to learn about it, to get involved with it. And now we don't have a ham shack. We don't really have access to that tower anymore because the cables all went into that room and we can't be in the room. The club does have a lot of equipment at this point. Over the years, they'd really acquired a number of different radios, a number of different antennas. And in fact, they had a repeater up there in that building that had run for a lot of years. So I was trying to figure out what do we do? So the next thing we did is the picture on the left is a cell tower that was on top of Rice Hall. Now, Rice Hall is one of the newer buildings in the engineering school, right? So it's almost directly across from where the stadium is, down on the corner, towards where that new hotel is going up to, the Verve, if you've been down in there. So this cell tower, that's a whole story in itself, how that got approved to be put up on top of one of the engineering buildings, because it almost took an act of Congress, not quite Congress, but it did have to go to Richmond to get approval to get that put up. And I know the guy that was involved with that. He was a grad student at the time. This guy's a wheeler and dealer, right? And he works with our research group. So I kind of knew what it took to get that done. Now, the equipment that was installed there, that was at the time an experimental 5G cell tower. It was not any part of any of the usual networks. It's standalone cell tower, and it was Huawei equipment. At the time it was installed, that was no big deal. But after, you know, last year, that was you didn't want to say that out loud, that we had Huawei equipment installed at the engineering school. Needless to say, it was no longer in use. It had essentially been abandoned in place. And the guy who told me that, you know, the facilities manager for the engineering school, who said that we had to vacate OMERF, he said, but you know, that antenna that's up there on top of Rice Hall is not being used. And if somebody doesn't use it, they're going to want to take it down. And you didn't have to tell me twice. So we got up there and started looking at it and realized that there's a decent tower underneath all that cell phone equipment, that if we just remove the equipment, we had a good tower on top of this building. Not only that, but they had coax already running down into what's called the penthouse, which is the top floor of that building. Right, so they had a nice feed through down through the roof down into protected area. And so we talked to facilities management, and they actually were great to help us out. They said, we're happy to take anything down that you want. And said, great, what we need is to get all that equipment off of that tower. And they went and took it all down. They just pulled it down the hatch. And then I said, well, you know, what we really want is to put up this other antenna. And they said, whoa, we can't install anything, because as soon as we install it, we're responsible for it. I said, no problem. Don't say another word. We had access to the roof. So as soon as that tower was cleared, this is our evidence here. This is the current president and vice president there. We carried, this is an antenna. It's a dipole, a folded dipole. KQ4TNX. This is actually, this antenna, it's a UHF antenna. It's actually designed to work from 450 to 470. Oh, that's not quite right. I said, you know what? Let's pull it into the lab and measure it. And we hooked it up to a network analyzer, and it works great down at 440. So I said, you know, we're not going to touch that antenna. We're just going to put it up there and use it. And that's exactly what we did. So we got some clamps. We clamped that antenna up there. It's a really good antenna. It had been sitting in the ham shack up at that nuclear reactor building, not being used. The previous, my understanding is the previous repeater that was up there was using some other antenna that I think they just had at the top of the roof line of the building. So it was not a very good location. But now we've got this, I don't know, this is probably a 10, 12-foot tower with a nice antenna mounted up top and pulled that down in. So the current club president that was helping with this is he actually attended one of our meetings last spring, I think. And so he's been great. They helped get that up there. We clamped it up there, taped off the connectors, and then this is now in Rice Hall in that 5th floor penthouse area. It's all just air handling equipment essentially. So we moved this from OMERF. We've got the Kenwood TKR 850 UHF repeater with the ARCOM RC210 repeater controller, and we're up and running. And I know that some of you have actually gotten onto that repeater and used it, including Joe, W4UVA. I don't know, it was a week or two ago. We had a nice chat on that repeater. It's really a good repeater. So the funny thing is though, so we got this set up probably, it was last March. I figured, oh, great, we've got something the students can use. This will be fantastic. And so I went about saying, all right, we got the repeater. Are you getting on it? Are you using it? Okay, well, they pull up a radio in the meeting and say, oh, see, we got a repeater. And they click it and hear the repeater call out, this is W4UVA. But it was like pulling teeth to try to get them to actually get on the radio. And in fact, it wasn't until earlier this semester, I got a group of the students, the execs, so the president, Yusuf, the vice president, Richard, and 2 other students, to actually try holding a net. So just try it. You don't have to announce it to anyone, just get on there and do it. And they did a fine job with it. They called out, they did the process, and I was on there with them, right? So I talked them through it a little bit. But afterwards he said, you know, Professor Barker, we're just not that interested in it. We just don't want to get on the radio and talk on, it's just not that interesting. Okay, I mean, if they're not interested in it, they're not going to do it, right? It's just not going to, it's not grabbing their attention. That they've had these cell phones and all this amazing technology since they were babies. They just they don't see it, and it's not connecting with them. So, you know, I've talked to them about all, you know, different things they could do. I mean, that we had 35 students show up to an interest meeting. It's not that they're not interested in radio technology, but you have to find the things that really grab them, that's going to get their attention. It's not what we're interested in. We're interested in different stuff. We're not on the same wavelength, literally, as they are. So the one thing that did really grab their imagination and their attention was making their own antennas, right? And so the one thing that actually the event, and we just did this, they did this, I didn't do it. They did two sessions. They did a first session where they advertised and had probably 15, 20 students show up to build their own tape measure Yagi antennas. Because again, you think about, I mean, my recollection, and I'm sure everybody in this room, you know, growing up, we had antennas everywhere. You had antennas on top of your TV that you had to play with. You had antennas on your car for your FM radio. You had your boombox with the antenna on it. We knew what antennas were. It wasn't that big of a deal. You had the Yagi on top of your house to pull in all your TV stations. Well, these kids don't see any of that. It's all gone. It's all hidden. Not that they're gone. Antennas are everywhere still, but they're all hidden. Right? On your car, they're hidden. On your cell phone, you have no idea. There's multiple antennas in the phone. You can't see any of it. Right? And so what really grabbed their attention is wow, we could make an antenna and it would actually work. And so they got the materials, they went to Lowe's, they bought some PVC pipe, they got some tape measures, you know, they went online and found the instructions. And then, so they did that. That was September 25th. They had a session. They got everybody in there making these antennas. They were having a great time doing it and yammering at each other. And then it was about, I think they did this a week later. So it was the end of October, or very first day of October, I think, on a Thursday. They announced that they were going to do the Fox Hunt. Now, initially, and then they kind of pivoted. And I thought, oh, I don't know, is that a good idea? Well, you know, the weekends in college, the students are off doing all kinds of other stuff. So what they did is they said, I mean, it's still nice out, a Thursday evening, at the end of the day, we're going to do a fox hunt. Okay. So they bought some little foxes online. They bought three of them, and the president and the vice president, they kind of went around grounds and put these foxes in different locations. They had three of them. They set them out. I don't know where. And the way they did it is they were all at three different frequencies. And when you started, you were told only one frequency. And you had to find that first one and to find the actual fox to read what is the next frequency that you then have to go find. So it was kind of like a hunt, and more of a hunt in that sense. So they had all these students with their antennas there that they built. This was some more photos here. And so they had a good group. I think they had at least 8 groups of students. They were all paired up. So it was probably 16 to 20 students that were there doing this fox hunt. And they had a blast. They really got a kick out of it. The president and vice president, they had bought some variable attenuators to stick on the radios or the SDRs so that when you got close, you could increase the attenuation, dial the signal down, and still be able to zero in on it. And the students just had a great time. I mean, some of the pictures you can see, they're smiling, they're happy. There's one of the foxes up in a tree here where they hit them. So this is the kind of activity that they really, it really spoke to them in a way that I didn't anticipate. You know, to me, it was, it's a crappy antenna. Why do you don't have to do with this? You're making it out of tape measure. I mean, but they had a blast with it. So, so that was really successful. And I think now that they're going to probably repeat a fox hunt, probably twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. And that'll be an activity that they continue to do because it brings people in. You don't even need a license, right, to do it. Somebody's got to have the license to set up the foxes, but the rest of the students, they can get in, they can get exposed to it, they can build stuff, they can interact with it. They don't need to take a test. They don't even have to have a license, right? But you get that hook in there, and they won't all do it. but some of them will. Some of them will say, you know what, I want to go further with that. And that's what we're looking for, right? That's what we need. So they have done some other activities. Mostly this semester, the other things they've done are actually identifying speakers. So the president of the club, Yusuf, he's a grad student. Actually, the president and vice president are both grad students. And they're interested in more than just amateur radio. They're interested in radio astronomy and all the other things you can do with radio. And you know, our lab at UVA, we do a lot of work with radio astronomy. That's one of the big applications once you get up to terahertz, right, and hundreds of gigahertz. And so they wanted to bring somebody in to talk to them about the hydrogen line that's at 21 centimeters. And Rich Bradley, who actually is a former, he was involved with the club in that heyday time in the 80s, I think, in early 90s. And so he came and they invited him to come give a talk, and he did that last week, September, it's 2 weeks ago, I guess. And so he did that, and they were just, you know, you can see there's a decent crowd in there, and they're just hungry to find out what can you do with this, and actually what they want to know is, can we set up our own measurement? Can we go set up our own antennas and point it up at the sky and measure this hydrogen line, right? That's what they want to do. And then later this month, they've got Mike McPherson coming to talk to them about how do we talk to satellites? How do we use our radios and make antennas to communicate with satellites? So, you know, it's not that they're not interested in the hobby, they are, but it's really finding what are the things that they want to do and that are going to interest them. It's not always the things that we want to do. And it'll change over time. I mean, you look back at the history of the club, and there's periods where, you know, some people, there's actually, if you go online, he's saying, oh yeah, I got into the club, and most of the people there, they were interested in 2 meters. Kind of like that was a bad thing, right? Like, clearly this person really wanted to do HF and GXing, right? So, but that's the great thing about the hobby, I think, is it does offer all these different aspects to it, that, you know, you can find whatever it is that you want is there to be found. So it's really so far it's been a great thing for the students. It really provides them a way to learn more about engineering and specifically about RF. And any of you that would like to come and meet the students and give a talk, we'd love to have you. Volunteers are welcome. So that's about it for my update. Happy to answer any questions. I'm sure there's folks in here that may know more about the history of the club than I do. But in terms of the recent club developments, that's what's going on.
Scott, that's amazing. I tried Kickstarting the club, but I didn't have the presence within the students that you have, you know, being just a lowly, humble analyst working in staff. But this is great stuff, folks. This is really good. One thing I might add, and you guys can share this with any youth that you know. If you are under 21, well, hold on, let me make sure I get that right. Yeah, if you're under 21 and a youth member, we don't charge for youth members. So literally everybody that's a member of W4UVA can visit our website and become a member of the Albemarle Amateur Radio Club. So that's a special thing we do for the university students at large. They don't even have to be a member of W4UVA, but he gave an example. For example, you know, maybe that one student comes along who's interested in HF and DX. You know, we can work with them. You know, they're a free member of our club, and we've got plenty of people in this club that participate in that. Or maybe they want to get into some of the you know, VARA HF or VARA FM or some of the digital FT8, FT4 stuff. So we're here, we are here for W4UVA in that regard. And, you know, if a student has some money, we would steer them to the proper transceiver, the Yaesu FT710. But thank you, Scott, that was great. Skip another round of applause. Dennis, do you have a question?